The city pulsed beneath him like a living machine, New York radiant and ruthless. From the glass walls of the penthouse on the 52nd floor, Damian Caldwell could see it all. Rivers of headlights streaming through the avenues, neon lights flickering over nameless faces. But he felt nothing. 3 years ago, he'd lost the ability to feel not just in his body, but in his soul. The room behind him was immaculate, a museum of success. Polished marble floors, minimalist furniture, a piano he never played. Even his reflection staring back from the tall windows looked more like an exhibit than a man. He loosened his tie and walked toward the bar. The sound of the whiskey pouring into the glass echoed too loudly in the emptiness. He drank, but the burn no longer reached him. 3 years. That was how long it had been since the accident. Since the night the call came, the one that carved him hollow. His parents, the only family he had, were on their way to see him after his surgery. He was recovering from an injury, then something that seemed so trivial now. They never arrived. Every therapist, every doctor had said the same thing. "You're physically fine, Mr. Caldwell. The rest will take time." But time had only widened the silence inside him. He'd built his empire on code, innovation, and control. But this failure of his own body, of his own heart, was something no algorithm could fix. Damian sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at his hands. They trembled faintly. He could close billion-dollar deals, command boardrooms of men twice his age, yet he couldn't hold someone without feeling the weight of what he'd lost. He couldn't be touched without remembering the sound of rain against the glass that night, the unanswered phone call, the headlights cutting through the dark. He'd tried to rebuild relationships, connections, distractions, but every woman he met left feeling like a mirror reflecting his emptiness back at him. They wanted a man who could give, and he had nothing left to offer. He'd begun to wonder if maybe he was meant to be alone. Then came the soft knock. "Housekeeping." The voice was light, careful, as if it didn't want to disturb the air itself. Damian didn't answer. He was too lost in the rhythm of his own isolation. The door opened a fraction, and a woman stepped in quietly, pushing a cart laden with towels and fresh linens. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't realize you were still here." He turned toward her, and for a moment, time hesitated. The light from the window fell across her face. Her skin was the deep warmth of mahogany, smooth and luminous. Her eyes, soft, dark, unguarded, met his, and something in his chest gave a faint, startling pulse. It wasn't attraction, not at first. It was recognition, a strange sense of being seen in a way he hadn't been in years. "It's fine," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "Go ahead." She nodded and moved through the room, her presence quiet but oddly grounding. The faint scent of jasmine lingered in her wake. She didn't avoid looking at him, but she didn't stare either. There was no trace of the polite fear most people carried around him, the kind that came with money and power. She simply existed, unafraid. He watched her rearrange pillows, change sheets, wipe down glass. Every movement was deliberate, efficient, yet there was grace in it, a patience he couldn't name. For the first time in a long while, Damian didn't feel like a ghost haunting his own life. "What's your name?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Janie, sir," she replied without looking up. "How long have you worked here?" 6 months. She turned toward him, then a folded towel in her hands. "Would you like me to come back later?" "No," he said quickly. "Stay." Her brows lifted slightly, but she nodded. Something strange was happening, subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. Damian felt warmth rise through his body, a stirring that made him dizzy. He tried to steady his breathing to push the sensation away, but it only grew stronger. It was impossible. It had been 3 years since he'd felt anything like this. Janie must have sensed his unease because she stepped closer, concern flickering across her face. "Are you all right, sir?" He swallowed hard. "I don't know." Her gaze met his again, and he swore he saw it, a faint shimmer of understanding, like she'd known pain too once. "I'll be done soon," she said softly, retreating toward the door. But before she could leave, he heard himself speak. "Wait." She paused, hand on the door handle. Nothing, he said after a moment. "You can go." She smiled politely, a small, gentle curve that reached her eyes and left. The door closed behind her, with a quiet click. Damian stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she'd been. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt something alive stir inside him. Not just desire, but curiosity, awe, maybe even hope. He tried to dismiss it, to tell himself it was a fluke. But as the hours passed, her image stayed with him, the way her eyes had softened when she asked if he was all right, the steadiness in her voice, the calm she carried with her, like a hidden light. That night, sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her not as a stranger, but as if she'd walked into a memory he hadn't yet lived. By morning, he'd made a decision. He called the hotel manager and requested that Janie be assigned to his suite exclusively for the remainder of his stay. When asked for a reason, he lied. Consistency, he said. But the truth was simpler. He needed to understand what had just happened. Why this woman, this quiet stranger, could awaken something that 3 years of medicine therapy and meaningless encounters couldn't. That afternoon, as he waited for her return, Damian caught his reflection again in the glass. He looked different. Not healed, not yet, but less hollow. There was color returning to the edges of him. When the knock came at 10 sharp, he felt his pulse quicken. "Good morning, sir," Janie said, as she entered her presence once again, soft but steady. "Good morning," he replied, then hesitated. "Please, call me Damian." She blinked, uncertain. "I couldn't do that. Hotel policy, I'm requesting it. Personally." Janie studied him for a moment, as though trying to read his intentions. Then cautiously, "All right? Damian." The sound of his name in her voice sent a quiet jolt through him. He found himself asking questions about her family, her work, her life, and she answered sometimes with hesitation, sometimes with a spark of humor that made him almost smile. When she spoke of her grandmother, who'd raised her after her parents' deaths, Damian felt a strange echo in his chest, the same kind of grief shaped differently, but familiar. "You must miss her," he said. "I do. But she's still here. Some people stay even after they're gone, in how you breathe, in the way you try to be better." He looked at her, then truly looked. "You believe that I have to," she said quietly. "Otherwise the world would feel too heavy." Her words sank into him like sunlight through frost. After she left, Damian stood by the window again, the city blurring beneath him. He wasn't sure what was happening, only that he didn't want it to stop. For the first time in years, he wanted to wake up tomorrow. But as he turned from the window, he didn't notice the blinking red light on his security camera or the unseen figure somewhere far below, watching his suite through a monitor. Someone had noticed the shift in his routine. Someone who remembered how Damian used to belong to her. The healing had just begun, but so had the danger. The next morning unfolded like silk, slow, muted, and uncertain. Damian woke before dawn, the city still half asleep beneath a gauze of mist. For a while he simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to name the feeling that had settled in his chest since yesterday. Hope, maybe, or danger. He dressed without thinking much about it. Black shirt, gray trousers, the kind of armor men like him wore to disguise the tremors underneath. Yet when he looked at his reflection in the mirror, The man staring back wasn't the same one who'd looked hollow for years. There was color on his face, an echo of life, and that frightened him more than the emptiness ever had. At exactly 10, a soft knock sounded on the door. "Good morning, Damian," came the familiar voice. Something in him softened immediately. "Good morning, Janie. Come in." She stepped into the sweet sunlight, following her like a quiet admirer. Today she wore the same uniform as before, black dress, white apron, but somehow it looked different on her. Maybe it was the way she moved, or maybe it was the way he saw her now as someone whose presence had rearranged the air around him. Janie went about her tasks with unhurried precision, dusting the piano keys he never touched, aligning books on the shelf, changing the flowers by the window. Every so often, Damian caught himself watching her reflection in the glass. The rhythm of her movements, the calm confidence in them, felt like a kind of music he hadn't realized he missed. He wanted to ask her 100 questions. What she dreamed of, what made her laugh, whether she ever felt lonely too. But the words caught in his throat because something told him that whatever thread tied them together was fragile, and he didn't yet know how to hold it without breaking it. "Would you like me to open the balcony doors?" she asked suddenly. "Please," he said. The morning air slipped in cool and bright, carrying with it the distant hum of the city. Janie stood there for a moment facing the skyline. Her braids shimmered under the light, and Damian found himself wondering what her hair would look like, free, wild like the wind itself. "Do you ever stop to look at it?" she asked without turning around. "The city, yes. Or do you just live above it?" The question landed deeper than she probably intended. He hesitated. "I used to. Before." Before what? Before the accident. Before the silence. Before the night, he stopped believing that happiness was anything but a rumor. But he couldn't tell her that. Not yet. Before everything started to feel the same, he said finally. Janie turned her eyes steady on his. Maybe that means it's time for something different. There was no flirtation in her tone, only quiet truth, and yet somehow it disarmed him more than any seduction could have. He cleared his throat, stepping away. "Coffee?" She blinked, surprised. "Sir, that's my job." "Not today." He moved toward the small espresso machine and began preparing 2 cups. The act felt strangely intimate, almost vulnerable. When he handed her one, their fingers brushed barely, but the contact sent a current through him so sharp, he almost dropped the cup. "Thank you," she murmured. They drank in silence. It wasn't awkward, just charged, as if every quiet second between them carried meaning neither dared to name. After a while, Janie set her cup down carefully. "I should finish up." He wanted to stop her, to ask her to stay, to talk, to breathe the same air a little longer. Instead, he nodded. "Of course." But as she gathered her cleaning supplies, she paused, frowning slightly at a small photograph on his nightstand, the only personal object in the room. "Is that your family?" she asked gently. He followed her gaze. The image showed a younger version of himself, with his parents smiling under a summer sun. His mother's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. His father's arm was around them both. "Yes," Damian said after a pause. "It was taken a week before they died." Janie didn't move closer, didn't offer the perfunctory condolences people usually did. She simply looked at the photo for a long, respectful moment, then said softly, "You must have loved them deeply." The simplicity of it undid him. "I did. I still do." She turned back to him. "Then they're not gone." Not really. He wanted to believe that, but belief had always been the hardest part. When she left a few minutes later, the room seemed to collapse back into silence. Yet it was a different kind of silence now, less like emptiness, more like waiting. That evening, Damian sat at his desk pretending to read a report he'd already approved. His thoughts kept circling back to her. He wanted to know why she'd said what she did, why her words had cut through the static of his grief. He didn't notice the buzz of his phone until it persisted. The name flashing on the screen made his stomach clench. Isabella Rothschild. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity or guilt won. Damian. Her voice purred through the lines, smooth and venomous. It's been too long. What do you want, Isabella? Just to see how you're recovering. Word around town is that our favorite tech god has been hiding out at the Ritz, monitoring me now. Don't flatter yourself. I simply care. You are important to me. He laughed bitterly. You cared until the money was threatened. Let's not rewrite history. Don't be cruel. I know what happened to you, and I know what you've been trying to fix. Her tone sharpened. Does she know every muscle in his body went still? Who the maid? He froze. Damian, darling, people talk. Staff gossip. You should know better than to get involved with help. It's adorable. Really broken billionaire finds comfort in pretty commoner. But you know how this city loves a scandal. How do you know about her? His voice was low, dangerous. I know enough. Be careful, Damian. You're not the only one watching. The line went dead. He sat there for several minutes, the phone still in his hand. Anger building in layers, not just at Isabella's intrusion, but at himself. For letting anyone close enough to notice his weakness. For letting Janie become something he wanted to protect. He turned toward the window. Below, the city glittered with indifference. Somewhere out there, his past was stirring again, the one he thought he'd buried under money and silence. The next morning, he woke to the sound of rain against glass, a cruel echo of the night that had broken him years ago. At 10, the knock came again, softer this time. When Janie entered, he saw her glance at him and stop. "Are you all right?" she asked. He realized he must have looked worse than he thought. Hair uncombed, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. "I'm fine," he lied. She studied him quietly, then set her supplies down. "You don't look fine. Rough night. Bad dreams." He hesitated. "Something like that." Janie nodded, as if understanding without needing to pry. She walked to the table and, without asking, began to pour coffee from the carafe. When she handed him the cup, he noticed the faint tremor of her hands and knew he wasn't the only one fighting something unseen. "Thank you," he said softly. She gave a small smile. "We all have our storms, Damian. The trick is to stop standing in the rain, pretending we're not getting wet." He looked at her, struck by the quiet strength in her tone. "Is that what you do?" "Most days," she said. "Some days I just let it pour." Her honesty disarmed him completely. He wanted to tell her everything about Isabella, about the threat, about the way her presence both healed and terrified him. But he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he asked, "Why are you kind to me?" Janie's expression softened. "Because I know what it's like to be invisible." Their eyes met and held. The air between them felt alive again, but this time the warmth carried a shadow of something else. Danger, maybe. Or inevitability. Before she left that day, she paused at the door. "Damian," she said, voice low but sure. "Whatever you're running from, it's already trying to find you." He wanted to ask what she meant, but she was gone before he could speak. That night, alone in the suite, Damian stared at the blinking red light on his security panel, the same one he'd ignored before. Only now, it felt like an omen. He crossed the room and disabled the system. The feed showed a still image, himself standing by the window, and in the background, a shadowed figure captured in the glass. Someone had been watching. He didn't know who yet, but deep down, he could guess. Outside, the rain fell harder. Inside, Damian picked up his phone, thumb hovering over Janie's number, but he didn't call. He couldn't drag her into the storm that was about to break. Still, as he stared into the night, he couldn't shake her words. Whatever you're running from, it's already trying to find you. And somewhere in the city, in a high-rise office that gleamed like a knife, Isabella Rothschild smiled over a monitor, replaying the moment Damian first looked at Janie. "Found you," she whispered. The healing had begun, but love was about to become the most dangerous thing either of them had ever known. The rain had stopped by morning, but the city still wore its grief. The streets shimmered like glass, and the skyline looked bruised beneath the lingering clouds. Damian stood by the window again, a habit that had turned into ritual, watching, waiting, listening for something unnamed. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, fragments of the surveillance footage replayed in his mind, the faint outline of a shadow reflected in the glass, the eerie certainty that he wasn't alone. Isabella's voice lingered too, wrapping around him like smoke. "Be careful, Damian. You're not the only one watching." He poured coffee with unsteady hands. His empire had taught him control, market trends, technology, human nature. But this was different. This was the loss of control itself, and it terrified him more than the emptiness ever had. When the knock came at 10, his pulse quickened despite everything. "Good morning," Janie said softly as she entered. Her voice grounded him, steady and real. She moved about the room with quiet focus, humming under her breath, unaware of the storm that had begun to gather around them both. He watched her as if memorizing something fragile. The curve of her wrist, the faint smudge of soap on her sleeve, the way she tucked a loose braid behind her ear. Ordinary gestures, yet they felt like lifelines. "Did you sleep?" she asked, glancing up. He shook his head. "Not much. Nightmares again." Something like that. She didn't press. She never did. Instead, she picked up a vase from the windowsill and replaced the withered lilies with fresh ones. Their scent filled the room, light and alive. "Lilies," she said quietly. "My mother loved them." He wanted to ask about her mother, but something in her tone made him hesitate. So instead he asked, "What about you? What do you love?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Love?" she repeated as if testing the word. "Yes," he said, voice softer now. "What makes you feel alive?" Janie thought for a long moment, then said, "Quiet mornings. The smell of clean sheets. The sound of someone remembering your name like it matters." Her eyes lifted to his, and something flickered there, a connection fragile but undeniable. Damian felt the ground shift beneath him, subtle, yet seismic. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but the shrill ring of his phone cut through the air. He didn't recognize the number, but dread coiled in his gut. He stepped aside to answer it. Mr. Caldwell came a smooth male voice. "This is Detective Monroe with the NYPD. I believe you reported a possible security breach." "Yes. We've reviewed your building's footage. Someone accessed your suite's system remotely. We traced the activity to a private IP registered under the Rothschild Foundation." Damian's grip tightened around the phone. "You're sure as digital forensics gets. We're looking into it. In the meantime, we recommend staying somewhere else." He ended the call, his pulse hammering. Isabella. It had to be. She'd gone beyond threats. Now she'd broken into his life, his space, his privacy. Damian, Janie's voice pulled him back. He looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment he realized how much danger she was in, simply by standing there. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Something in his tone made her set the vase down carefully. "About what?" He hesitated. How did he explain that his past was no longer buried, that it was coming for them both. "There's someone who doesn't want me happy," he said finally. "Someone who'll hurt anyone close to me just to make sure I stay broken." Janie's brows furrowed. "An ex?" He nodded. "Is she dangerous?" "Yes." Janie crossed her arms, steady but not afraid. "And you think she's watching you?" "She was watching me, through my own security system." For a moment, silence pressed between them. Then Janie said, "Then she's already watching us." The words hit him like cold water. He wanted to deny it to protect her, but denial had never been his strength. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have to stay, Janie. You could leave this job, this hotel, go somewhere safe." Her eyes searched his, calm and unflinching. "And would you be safe if I left?" He didn't answer. "Then, I'm staying," she said simply. "Why?" "Because I don't run from storms anymore." The defiance in her voice stirred something deep in him. Admiration, fear, longing. But underneath it all was a truth he hadn't wanted to face. He'd already fallen for her. It wasn't just gratitude or attraction anymore. It was something that lived in the marrow of him, frightening and fragile. He took a step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Janie, you don't understand." "I do," she interrupted gently. "You're scared, but so am I. And maybe that's the point. Maybe healing doesn't come from safety. Maybe it comes from standing still while the lightning hits." He exhaled slowly, the fight leaving him. Then she reached for his hand. It was a small gesture, almost tentative, but the contact felt electric. Not lust, not desperation, but recognition. A quiet surrender. "Damian," she said softly, "let me help you." Something inside him broke open then, not painfully, but like a door, long rusted, finally giving way. He closed his hand around hers. For the first time in years, the tremor in his fingers stilled. That evening, the sky cleared. The city gleamed again, fresh and wet, its edges softened by light. Damian and Janie sat on the balcony, the wind threading through their silence. He told her about his parents the night of the accident, the guilt that had gnawed at him since. She listened, eyes glistening but steady. Then she told him about her grandmother, how illness had forced her to work 2 jobs, how she'd stopped believing she deserved anything more than survival. They were 2 broken stories, parallel and raw, but together they felt like pieces of the same book. When she laughed softly, unexpectedly, the sound startled him. What he asked. "You," she said. "You look like someone remembering how to breathe." He smiled, small but real. "Maybe I am." For a while they said nothing more. The air between them grew warmer, thicker, charged with everything unspoken. Then Janie stood. "I should go. Stay a little longer," he said before he could stop himself. Her eyes met his hesitant. "You shouldn't ask me that." "Why not?" "Because if I stay, I might not want to leave." The confession hung between them, trembling with truth. He rose too, closing the distance between them. Then, "Don't." The world seemed to narrow to the scent of rain, the brush of air, the faint tremble of her breath. When he kissed her, it wasn't hungry or rushed. It was slow, deliberate, like a man relearning language through touch. She didn't pull away. Her hands found his shoulders, tentative at first, then certain. For one stolen moment, the world made sense again. And then the sound of a distant shudder. A flash, subtle but unmistakable. Janie froze. What was that? Damian turned sharply toward the skyline, but saw nothing except the glittering city. Probably nothing, he said, though his voice betrayed him. But as Janie gathered her things to leave, unease crept back into his chest. After she was gone, he checked his phone. An email waited in his inbox. No subject line, no name, just a single attachment. He opened it. A photo of him and Janie standing on the balcony, her lips inches from his hand cradling her face. Beneath it, a single line of text. Beautiful, isn't it? The world loves a scandal. His blood turned to ice. He looked toward the city again, its lights sharp as knives. Somewhere out there, Isabella was smiling. And somewhere deeper inside, a quieter fear began to take root, not of exposure, but of loss. Because for the first time since his parents died, Damian had someone to lose again. And this time, the storm had his name on it. The night swallowed Manhattan whole. From the penthouse window, the skyline glittered like 1,000 secrets waiting to be told. Damian stood barefoot on the cold marble floor, staring at the photo glowing on his phone, the one Isabella had sent. It was beautiful in a cruel way. A perfect frame, him and Janie on the balcony, faces inches apart, the city blurred behind them like a dream about to shatter. A moment that should have been private, sacred, now turned into a weapon. He zoomed in. The faint reflection of another building mirrored in the glass revealed where the photo was taken across the street 2 floors down. She was close. Too close. His throat tightened. Isabella had always been meticulous. When they'd been together, she'd called it foresight. Now, it was obsession dressed in silk and strategy. He deleted the image, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done, not to his reputation, but to the fragile world he and Janie had begun to build. He looked toward the door, half expecting her knock. But she wouldn't come tonight. After what happened on the balcony, he'd asked her to take a few days off. It wasn't because he wanted distance. It was because he was terrified that staying near him would ruin her. He hadn't told her about the photo, about Isabella, about the fact that someone was now watching their every breath. And yet the suite felt emptier, without her, too quiet, too clean. The lilies she'd placed by the window were starting to wilt. He couldn't bring himself to throw them away. When Janie arrived 2 mornings later, she hesitated before knocking. Something inside her told her not to come back, that she was stepping into a storm she didn't understand. But something stronger pulled her forward. When Damian opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "That's not for you to decide." Her tone was soft but firm, the kind that disarmed him completely. She stepped inside, scanning his face. "You look like someone who's been haunted." He wanted to lie, to say he was fine. But the exhaustion in his eyes betrayed him. "Maybe I am," he said quietly. "By what?" "By everything I thought I buried." She didn't ask more. She simply reached for the curtains, pulling them open to let sunlight flood the room. Dust floated in the air like small fragments of peace. "You can't keep living in the dark," she said. "It only feeds whatever's chasing you." He watched her move, graceful, determined, unaware that she was the only light left, holding him together. "Janie," he said finally, "there's something I have to tell you." She turned to him, but before he could speak, his phone buzzed again. Another message, another photo. This time it was worse. Janie standing outside his door, holding the bouquet she always brought. Her expression soft, unaware. Beneath it, the same line as before. "Beautiful, isn't it? But beauty fades." Damian's blood ran cold. He turned the screen toward her. "This is what I've been trying to protect you from." Her face paled. Who took that?" "My ex. Isabella. She's been following me, following us. She hacked into my security system. Sent these as warnings." Janie set the bouquet down slowly, as if afraid that even her movements might trigger something. Warnings for what? For daring to move on. Her silence stretched between them, heavy as thunder. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked. "Because I didn't want to scare you away." She gave a bitter laugh. "You don't get to decide what I can handle, Damian. I was trying to protect you. You can't protect someone by lying to them." Her words hit him harder than any threat Isabella could make. "Janie, please, no," she said, shaking her head. "You don't get it. I've lived through fear before. Real fear. The kind that takes everything from you. I thought with you, it would be different. It is different," he said, stepping closer. "Then prove it." "How?" "Stop running." The challenge in her eyes reminded him of who he used to be, the man who faced impossible odds and built empires from ideas. But this was different. This was love, not logic. And for the first time, he wasn't sure which was harder to protect. That evening they sat together on the edge of the bed, the city lights painting silver lines across the room. "Tell me about her," Janie said quietly. "Isabella." She nodded. He hesitated, then exhaled. "She was brilliant, ruthless. We built a company together when I was 24. She helped me expand it. We were unstoppable until I realized she didn't love me. She loved power. My family didn't approve of her, and when my parents died, she turned my grief into leverage." Janie's expression softened, though her voice stayed calm. "And you still let her in." "I was broken. She offered control. I didn't realize she was the one holding the strings. And now she's pulling them again." Janie reached for his hand. "Then we cut them." Her certainty startled him. "How?" "By refusing to play her game." He stared at her, at the quiet strength beneath her calm. "You think we can win against her? I think she only wins if we let her make us afraid." Something inside him shifted, not all at once, but like ice cracking under light. He'd spent years building walls so high that even love couldn't climb them. And yet here she was dismantling them, one truth at a time. He looked at her, the faint curve of her jaw illuminated by the city's reflection. "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone once told me not to hide from the rain," she said. "So now I don't." The air between them thickened with quiet electricity. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers trembling slightly. "Janie," he whispered, "I'm not sure what happens next." "Neither am I," she replied. "But I'm sure of this." She leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. "I'm not going anywhere." Later that night, after she'd fallen asleep beside him, her breathing steady, her hand resting against his chest, Damian stared at the ceiling, thoughts restless and raw. He could feel her trust like a weight. It anchored him, but it also terrified him, because trust meant responsibility, and responsibility meant risk. He slipped out of bed quietly and walked to his desk. The city stretched before him, luminous and indifferent. He opened his laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. There was only one person who could end this, Isabella. If she wanted a war, he would give her one. But as he began typing, drafting an email to his security consultant, a faint sound broke through the quiet. A soft click, like the sound of a door easing open. He froze. "Janie," he whispered. No answer. Then movement. A figure reflected in the window just behind him. Damian spun around, but the balcony doors were shut, the curtains still swaying faintly from the air conditioning. He stepped closer, pulse hammering. The handle was cold to the touch. Outside, the city shimmered, but on the glass, faint fingerprints glowed against the light. Someone had been there, watching. He turned to wake Janie, but stopped. She was already awake, sitting up, her eyes wide with fear. "I saw it too," she whispered. "Someone on the balcony." Damian moved to her side, instinctively shielding her from the window. "It's her," he said quietly. "It has to be." But even as he said it, another truth crept into him like frost. If Isabella had come this far into his building, into his home, this wasn't just about jealousy anymore. It was about ownership. And love, he realized, was no longer the only thing at stake. Outside, lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the city for one breathless second, long enough for Damian to see the faint outline of a woman across the street, camera in hand, staring up at him through the rain. When the darkness returned, she was gone. He closed the curtains, heart racing. Behind him, Janie whispered, "What now?" He looked at her, his answer quiet but certain. "Now," he said, "we stop being the hunted." And as thunder rolled across the skyline, Damian knew this was no longer a story about healing. It was a story about survival and the kind of love that burns brightest when it's under siege. The storm didn't end that night. It only learned how to wait. By morning, the sky was pale and deceptively calm, like the city had decided to pretend nothing had happened. But Damian knew better. He'd seen the outline of the woman with the camera. He'd felt the electric pulse of danger humming just beyond the glass. He hadn't told Janie that Isabella once promised him this. "If I can't have your heart, I'll have your name." Now it felt less like a threat and more like a prophecy. He found her standing by the kitchen island, dressed in her uniform. Again, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pulled back with quiet precision. She looked like peace in human form, but he knew peace was the last thing she felt. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice steady. He nodded. "Please." They didn't talk for a while. The sound of the machine filled the silence, soft, domestic, almost ordinary. When she handed him the mug, their fingers brushed, and it hit him how easily she'd become part of his routine. How easily love had turned into need. She leaned against the counter, watching him. "You didn't sleep. Neither did you." Her lips curved faintly. "Maybe I was listening for footsteps." He looked at her, guilt tightening in his chest. "You shouldn't have to live like this. I dragged you into something dangerous." "No," she said simply. "You didn't drag me. I walked in." Her calm unnerved him, so much strength wrapped in such gentleness. He wanted to tell her that strength had a cost, that sometimes the people who stayed in the fire the longest forgot how to step out. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. A message from his assistant, urgent. Press leak scheduled at noon. Story billionaire's affair with hotel maid. The world tilted. Janie saw the change in his face. "What is it?" He handed her the phone. She read the text slowly, her hands trembling by the end. "She's going public. Looks like it. And she'll ruin everything you've built." He shook his head. "No. She'll try to ruin you." She looked at him, hurt flickering through her composure. "Then let her. I've survived worse than bad press." "Janie." "No," she said, voice rising. "Don't you dare make this about protecting me again. If she wants a war, let's fight it together." He felt something hot rise in his throat. Not anger, but awe. Because even now, when her entire life could unravel, she refused to back down. "Together," he said finally. She nodded once, decisive. "Then we start by taking control of the story." He frowned. Meaning if the world's going to talk about us, let's give them the truth instead of her version." He stared at her, stunned. "You want to go public? Now?" "Yes," she said, eyes clear. "Before she can weaponize it. You built a company from nothing. You know how to control a narrative. Use it." Her logic was brutal and beautiful all at once. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If we do this, there's no going back." "Good," she said. "I'm tired of hiding." By 11, the decision was made. Damian's media team was assembled in his office, downtown, faces pale, eyes sharp, already half aware of the scandal brewing online. Janie stayed by his side as the team debated headlines and strategies, her presence the only steady pulse in the chaos. "She's painting this as a seduction story," his publicist said grimly. "We can't erase it, but we can redirect it, humanize it." "Truth," Janie said simply. "That's the only thing that will survive." The publicist blinked at her, then nodded slowly. "Truth, then, but it needs to come from both of you." At 11:45, they stood before the cameras. No flashy backdrop, no staging, just a window overlooking the skyline. Damian spoke first. "For 3 years I lived as a ghost," he said. "Success without peace, power without purpose. Until one day someone walked into my life and reminded me what it means to feel human again." He turned to Janie. "She didn't save me because I'm rich. She saved me because she saw me when I couldn't see myself." Janie's voice trembled, but she didn't look away from the cameras. "I never expected to meet him. I was just doing my job. But sometimes the people we're meant to help aren't strangers, they're mirrors. Damian taught me that love isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about holding on while it heals." The silence afterward felt like prayer. By afternoon, the video had spread across every platform. Some called it a publicity stunt. Others called it the love story of the year. Isabella didn't call it anything. She just watched. In her penthouse across the river, she stood before a wall of screens, the reflection of her own face, distorted by headlines. "Caldwell's confession goes viral. From maid to muse, the woman who healed a billionaire." Her fingers tightened around her wine glass until it cracked. "You wanted a stage," she whispered. "Fine. Let's burn it down together." She hit send on a final email, one that contained the last weapon she had left. A video file. Damian's voice raw and broken from one of his therapy sessions. "I don't think I can ever be whole again. I can't even touch someone without remembering the crash, without feeling guilty for being alive." When the file leaked that evening, the internet devoured it. The headlines turned darker. Damian Caldwell's secret trauma. Is his love just therapy? The same world that had applauded them that morning now dissected their pain like a performance. Damian sat on the edge of the bed staring at the TV. His voice echoed back to him from every screen. He felt stripped naked, violated small. Janie turned off the television and knelt in front of him. "This isn't your fault," she said. "It's my voice, Janie. My pain. And now it's trending." "Then let them hear it," she said fiercely. "Let them hear what healing actually sounds like. Let them know you're human." He met her gaze, and for the first time that night, something inside him steadied. "You're not afraid of what?" "The truth." He exhaled, a small broken laugh escaping him. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," she said softly. "It's brave." At dawn, they watched the sun rise over the city. The world hadn't stopped spinning. Outside, cars still moved. People still hurried to work. The sky still turned from gray to gold. Janie leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know what I think?" "What?" "That she's already lost." He glanced at her. "How?" "Because she wanted to make you feel small again. But look at you, Damian. You're still standing." He followed her gaze to the horizon. For the first time in years, he didn't see a battlefield. He saw a beginning. Later that morning, his security consultant called. "We traced the leak. The footage came from an encrypted drive in Rothschild's apartment. She's gone. Gone flew to Zurich last night. We've alerted the authorities." He hung up, relief and sorrow twisting together inside him. Isabella was gone, but the wreckage she left behind would take time to clear. He turned to Janie, who was watering the lilies by the window, sunlight glinting off her skin. "You were right," he said quietly. "She's lost." Janie looked up, smiling faintly. No, Damian. We didn't win because she lost. We won because we refused to hate her. The words settled into him like peace after war. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind. She leaned back into him, sighing. So she whispered, "What happens now?" He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Now we live." Out loud, without fear. Outside, the city pulsed with light again. Loud, chaotic, alive. And somewhere across the ocean, a woman watched their story play on her screen, tears streaking down her perfect face. For the first time, even Isabella understood what it meant to lose something real. But in that glass tower high above Manhattan, Damian and Janie finally understood what it meant to begin. The news cycle moved on, as it always does. A week after Isabella's disappearance, the headlines faded from scandal to speculation, and then into silence. The world had already found a new story to obsess over. But inside the penthouse, silence had its own weight. Janie stood by the window, looking down at the city below, the endless rhythm of cars, lives, and lights that never stopped moving. She wondered if peace always looked like motion when you'd lived too long in stillness. Behind her, Damian was on a call with his legal team. His voice was calm, precise. But there was a strain beneath the surface, the sound of someone trying to rebuild too quickly after a storm. When he hung up, she turned to him. "You haven't eaten." "I will," he said absently. "You said that yesterday." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've been keeping track." "Someone has to," she murmured. The air between them felt fragile, not cold, but careful. They'd survived Isabella's chaos, the public humiliation, the betrayal, and yet something quieter had begun to grow in the ruins' distance. Healing, Janie was learning, wasn't just about surviving pain. It was about learning what to do with peace once it arrived. That night, Damian dreamed again. The sound of screeching tires. His mother's voice. "We're coming, darling. Don't worry." The flash of headlights. Then nothing. He woke with a gasp, heart hammering. The sheets were damp with sweat. Beside him, Janie stirred. "You're okay," she whispered, touching his arm. "It's just a dream." But he wasn't sure it was. He could still smell the rain from that night. Still hear the silence after the crash. He turned to her, eyes dark with exhaustion. "I thought I was done with it. I thought I'd made peace." "You don't make peace in a week," she said softly. "You make it one night at a time." Her hand lingered on his chest until his breathing slowed. But even as he drifted back to sleep, she stayed awake, watching him, memorizing the rhythm of his breath, wondering how to love someone who kept waking up in another life. The next morning, a letter arrived. No sender, no return address, just his name typed in clean serif font. Damian opened it while Janie poured coffee. One sheet of paper, 3 lines. "You think you've won, but truth has a longer memory than love. He read it twice, then a third time. The handwriting wasn't Isabella's. It was printed impersonal, but the message was clear. Someone still wanted him haunted. When Janie saw his expression, she froze. "What is it?" "Nothing," he said too quickly, folding the letter. "Spam mail." Another reporter fishing for a story. She didn't believe him, but she didn't press. Trust wasn't just believing what someone said. Sometimes it was waiting for them to be ready to tell the truth. Still that night, she found him on the balcony, the letter torn to pieces in the ashtray beside an untouched drink. "You burned it?" she asked quietly. "I wanted to, but you didn't." He stared at the city. Some ghosts deserve to burn. Others, you just have to stop feeding. She stepped beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his sleeve against her arm. You don't have to fight alone anymore. I know. He hesitated. That's what scares me. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, life began to take shape again. Not the same as before, but softer. Damian returned to work at his firm. Meetings resumed. Cameras still followed him, but the tone had changed. The world loved a redemption story. Investors who'd once distanced themselves now called him a symbol of resilience. Janie, meanwhile, found herself lost in unfamiliar freedom. Without the hotel, without the uniform, without the anonymity she'd worn like armor, she didn't quite know who she was becoming. One afternoon, she found herself at a small bookstore in Brooklyn, the kind that smelled of paper and rain. She spent hours there not reading but thinking about everything she'd survived, everything she'd lost, and everything she still didn't know how to ask for. When she came home, Damian was waiting at the door. "You were gone all day," he said, more worried than accusing. "I needed space to breathe." He exhaled, tension softening from his shoulders. "I didn't realize I was suffocating you." "You're not," she said. "But sometimes love feels like a room that's too small when you're both still learning how to live in it." The truth in her words lingered between them like a low hum. He stepped closer. "Then let's build a bigger room." She smiled, the kind that broke and healed him all at once. The next week, Damian invited her to his parents' house, the one he hadn't visited since the funeral. It was on the outskirts of Long Island, a glass and stone home that looked like it had been designed to outlive grief. When they arrived, the garden was wild, overgrown with ivy and silence. He stood at the gate for a long time, unable to move. "Are you sure?" she asked. He nodded. "I have to." Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and memory. Dust covered the piano, his mother's favorite. A single photo remained on the mantel, his parents at a charity gala, eyes bright with the kind of pride that comes from believing your child will live forever. He ran a hand over the frame. "They would have liked you." Janie smiled faintly. "I hope so. They would have said I'm lucky." "You are," she teased. He looked at her, then really looked, and for a moment, she saw the boy he must have been before tragedy made him armor himself. "Come here," he whispered. She stepped into his arms, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel haunted. Outside, the wind stirred through the garden, carrying the scent of earth and rain. That night, after they returned to the city, Damian found Janie standing on the balcony again. The air was heavy with summer heat, her dress fluttering in the breeze. "I've been thinking," she said without turning. "That sounds dangerous. I want to go back to school." He blinked. "School?" "To finish my nursing degree." She looked at him, eyes bright with conviction. "I started it before my parents died. I had to drop out to take care of my grandmother. But now—" She hesitated. "Now I want to help people the way I helped you. For real." He stared at her, pride and fear tangling in his chest. "You don't need my permission." "I know. But I wanted your blessing." He smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "Then you have it. All of it." She stepped closer, brushing her thumb along his jaw. "You've been saving the world your way. Maybe it's my turn." He caught her hand, pressed it to his lips. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't let the world make you forget how soft you are." Her voice trembled. "I won't. You taught me that strength doesn't have to be loud." Later, as she packed her bag for the first day of classes, Damian watched her from the doorway. He felt something shift, pride. Yes, but also a quiet ache. He'd spent so long trying to be her protector that he'd forgotten love wasn't ownership. It was trust. When she looked up, their eyes met, and in that small, wordless exchange, they both understood what the next chapter would require: space, patience, and the courage to keep choosing each other even when life pulled them in different directions. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, finally. As she left, sunlight spilled through the door, painting her in gold. For a moment, Damian stood there alone, not broken, not healed, but becoming. He turned back toward the window, where the city shimmered like forgiveness itself. And for the first time since the crash, he whispered the words he'd never been able to say aloud. "Mom. Dad. I'm okay." The wind answered softly, carrying the scent of lilies. And somewhere in the noise of New York, a quiet promise was reborn, that love, once real, never truly fades. It just learns new ways to stay. Autumn came quietly that year. New York dressed itself in amber light and brittle wind, as if the city too was learning to let go. Damian watched the leaves gather in corners of the avenue below his penthouse, small, swirling fragments of change. It had been 3 months since Janie returned to school, 3 months since the rhythm of their days began to shift from closeness to correspondence. He saw her on weekends, when she could manage the train ride from campus, when her hands weren't full of textbooks and exhaustion. Every visit began with laughter and ended with silence that neither of them quite knew how to fill. He missed her, but he also knew this distance was what she needed to become the woman she was meant to be. Not a reflection of his world, but the author of her own. Still, the ache was constant, a steady pulse beneath everything he did. One night he found her asleep at his desk, papers scattered like fallen petals. Her hair had slipped loose from its braid, and her head rested against her arm. He stood there for a long time, watching the rise and fall of her breathing. In the faint glow of the desk lamp, she looked like everything he'd spent his life chasing: peace, purpose, belonging. And yet, for the first time, he wondered if love could survive the weight of two people still healing. When she woke, she smiled sleepily. "You're staring again. Can you blame me?" "Probably not." He kissed her forehead gently, tasting the salt of tiredness there. "You should rest." "I will." But first, she reached into her bag, pulling out a sealed envelope. "This came for you at school. They must have mixed up the address. It's handwritten." He frowned, taking it from her. The handwriting was elegant, familiar in a way that made the hairs on his neck rise. He opened it. Inside was a single photograph. A hospital room, his parents, or what was left of them, moments after the crash. And beneath it, in looping script, "Truth doesn't sleep forever, Damian." No signature, no date. But he knew. Isabella. She wasn't gone. He didn't tell Janie that night. He couldn't. She was too tired, too alive, too full of dreams that didn't deserve to be poisoned by the ghost of a woman who refused to die. Instead, he tucked the photo into a drawer, locked it, and lay beside Janie in the dark. But sleep wouldn't come. The past clawed its way through the walls of his mind, dragging him back to the night of the accident, the flashing lights, the guilt, the silence that followed. He realized then that maybe Isabella wasn't trying to destroy his reputation anymore. Maybe she wanted something far more personal: his peace. The next morning, Janie noticed the change immediately. The tightness in his jaw, the way he lingered near the window scanning the streets below. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," he said too quickly. "You're lying." He turned, his voice breaking on the edge of honesty. "She's still out there." Janie froze. "Isabella." He nodded. She sent another message, a photograph. From that night. Her expression softened with understanding, but fear lingered at the edges. "You think she's following you again? I don't know what she wants anymore." "Then we find out," Janie said firmly. He looked at her, at the calm strength behind her resolve, and remembered why he fell in love with her in the first place. "You shouldn't have to be part of this," he whispered. "I already am." They began to piece together what little they knew. Isabella's accounts were gone, her assets frozen after the embezzlement charges, but someone was funding her disappearance. Someone wanted to keep her hidden, or worse, protected. Days passed. Damian's company faced a quiet backlash. Investors grew nervous about the possibility of another scandal. The old anxiety returned, the same sharp, cold pressure that used to drive him through boardrooms and sleepless nights. He found himself working longer hours chasing stability, as if it could save him. Janie noticed the shift, though she said nothing. Until one night, when she arrived at his office unannounced. The city glittered behind her as she stepped in the elevator doors, sliding shut like a secret. "You didn't answer my calls," she said softly. "I was in meetings for 8 hours straight." He rubbed a hand over his face. "There's too much to fix." She studied him for a long moment, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Or too much to hide behind?" He looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're building walls again. I know what that looks like." The words hit harder than she knew. He turned away, staring out the window. "You think I don't know how to fight this? You think I don't wake up every night hearing the crash, wondering if it was my fault?" Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. "You can't fight guilt by burying yourself in glass towers, Damian. And what if that's all I know how to build?" The silence that followed was raw and heavy. Janie stepped closer, her reflection merging with his in the glass. "Then let me teach you something else." She placed her hand over his heart. "Start here." Something in him broke open, then a quiet surrender he'd been resisting for too long. He turned, pulling her into his arms, his voice rough against her hair. "I don't deserve you." "Maybe not," she said softly, "but you're learning." That night they stayed in the office until dawn. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The world outside slowly shifted from darkness to light, and with it came a fragile peace. But peace, Damian knew, was never permanent. 2 days later, an email arrived at his company's headquarters. No sender, just a link. The file was encrypted, labeled, "The Real Caldwell Legacy." When his assistant opened it, the building's firewalls crashed. Screens flickered. Images flashed his father's voice, his mother's medical records, his therapy sessions. Everything that had ever been private exposed again. By noon, it was everywhere. The internet devoured the story, Caldwell empire built on secrets and lies. He felt the world closing in the same suffocating weight as before. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Janie stood beside him, her hand finding his. "They'll twist it," he said bitterly. "They always do." "Then let them," she replied. "You've been running from your past since the day I met you. Maybe it's time you stop." Her courage ignited something inside him, a quiet, burning resolve. He walked to the podium that afternoon facing the press, not as the billionaire they wanted to crucify, but as a man finally unafraid to be human. "My family's story isn't perfect," he began. "Neither is mine. But perfection was never the goal. Healing was." The words spread faster than the lies. By evening, the same networks that had mocked him began to shift their tone. The narrative turned again, this time, not to scandal, but to strength. When he came home that night, Janie was waiting on the balcony wrapped in a blanket. "You did it," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "No, we did." The wind carried the scent of autumn leaves and rain. He stepped behind her, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What now?" "Now," she said, "we stop surviving and start living." He looked out at the city, vast, bright, imperfect, and for the first time in years, The space between heartbeats didn't feel like fear. It felt like home. But somewhere far from New York, in a hotel overlooking Lake Geneva, a woman in a white coat watched the news on a muted screen. A smile ghosted her lips as she whispered, "Let him breathe. The storm isn't over yet." Winter came early to New York, sharp and bright as forgiveness. The first snow fell quietly, blanketing the city in white, softening the noise, silencing the rush, turning even the harshest corners tender for a while. From the balcony of their apartment, Janie watched flakes settle on the railing. Behind her, Damian moved through the kitchen, sleeves rolled, making coffee, the way she liked, 2 sugars, 1 small stir counterclockwise. He said it made the sweetness spread more evenly. It had been 4 months since the last scandal. 4 months since Isabella's last whisper, or so they thought. Life, in its strange mercy, had begun to mend itself. Janie's classes were thriving. She'd been invited to assist a research project on trauma recovery through compassionate care. Damian had launched a foundation under her name, the Whitmore Initiative, funding education for women in healthcare. But beneath the warmth of their new life, both of them carried something unspoken, a quiet dread that peace this perfect could only be temporary. That evening, Janie returned from campus later than usual. She found the apartment glowing, candles on the table, soft jazz humming low. Damian stood by the window, his reflection framed by the city's gold light. He turned when she entered. "You're late." "I missed the train." She smiled, unwrapping her scarf. "Did I miss something else?" "Dinner?" He gestured toward the table, pasta, wine, an unopened envelope beside her plate. She frowned. "What's that?" He hesitated. "It came this morning. From Zurich." The room tightened around them. She sat slowly, eyes fixed on the envelope. He nodded. "It's postmarked 2 weeks ago. No return address, but it's her handwriting." "Then open it." "I already did." Her chest clenched. "And she's dying." Janie froze. "She has late-stage cancer." Damian continued quietly. "Says she wants to see me. One last time, in Switzerland." The words fell heavy between them like snow melting into silence. Finally, Janie spoke. "And you, I don't know. Do you want to go?" He met her eyes. "I don't know if I can." They didn't talk about it again that night. But at 3 a.m., Janie woke to find his side of the bed empty. She found him sitting by the window, staring out at the snow, a single photo in his hand. Him and Isabella from years ago, laughing at something that no longer existed. She destroyed everything he said quietly, not turning. And yet, I can't hate her the way I should. Janie knelt beside him, resting her head against his knee. "Maybe hate isn't what heals." He exhaled shakily. "If I go, it's not for her. It's for closure." "Then go," she whispered. "But promise me one thing. Don't stay there longer than your forgiveness does." He looked down at her, at the woman who had taught him that love could be both strong and soft at once. "You'd let me face her. I'd let you be free," she said. "Because love isn't a leash, it's a light." 2 weeks later, he left for Zurich. The hospital was quiet, clean, too white to feel alive. Isabella looked nothing like the woman he remembered, her hair gone, her eyes dim, but still sharp in a way that made the air around her tremble. "You came," she rasped. "I wasn't sure I should." "Neither was I," she said, a faint smile ghosting her lips. "But dying makes you braver." He stood at the foot of her bed. "Why call me?" "Because," she coughed, "you were the only man who ever loved me enough to hate me honestly." He said nothing. "I didn't send the last letter," she added. "Someone else did. My lawyer, probably. I wanted to say sorry, not scare you. Sorry doesn't undo what you did." "I know." Her eyes softened. But it can still mean something. He stared at her, and for the first time saw not the woman who had destroyed him, but the one who had never known how to love without control. She reached out, trembling. "Does she make you happy?" "Yes." "Then I didn't lose." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "Because it means I didn't break you completely." He left her room just before dawn. Snow was falling again, softer than before. In the cab back to the airport, he closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, there was no noise, only quiet. When he landed in New York, Janie was waiting at the gate. She didn't ask what happened. She just took his hand and said, "Welcome home." And for the first time, he believed it. Months passed. Spring returned. The foundation flourished. Her classes ended, and his company stabilized. Yet something deeper had changed. Something beyond headlines and healing. One evening, as they walked through Central Park, the cherry blossoms spilling light onto the path, Damian stopped. "Do you ever think about how it all began?" he asked. Janie smiled. "You mean the day I accidentally walked into your room and thought you were a ghost?" He laughed softly. "You looked more terrified than I did. I almost quit that day. Then the world would have lost its miracle." She turned toward him. "You still think that's what we are?" "A miracle." He brushed a petal from her hair. "No. We're what comes after the miracle, when love learns to stay." Later that night, as they sat on the balcony, the city glowing beneath them, he handed her a small box. She opened it. Inside was a silver key. "What's this?" "The new clinic. The Healing Heart Center. The first one's finished. In Philadelphia." Her breath caught. "You built it." "We built it. Together." She looked up, eyes glistening. "You kept your promise. I just followed your light." She reached for his hand, their fingers threading together like memory and forgiveness. "Let's go see it," she whispered. A month later, they stood in front of the clinic, a glass building bathed in morning light. On the front doors, etched in silver, Healing Heart Center, where love becomes medicine. Inside, patients filled the lobby. Mothers, veterans, children, people who had lost pieces of themselves, but hadn't stopped searching for them. A nurse handed Janie a clipboard. "You're our guest of honor." Janie smiled. "No, I'm just proof that healing is possible." Damian turned to her, his voice low. "You know, 5 years ago, I couldn't even say the word hope without choking. And now it's all I see when I look at you." That evening, after the opening ceremony, they walked to the garden behind the clinic. Rows of white lilies swayed in the wind, planted for his parents, for her grandmother, for all the people whose love had shaped them. Janie knelt, touching the soil. "Do you think they'd be proud?" "I think they already are." She looked up at him, the golden hour painting her skin in soft light. "We did it, Damian. We turned pain into something that breathes." He crouched beside her, his forehead resting against hers. "We didn't just heal Janie. We built a new way to love." As dusk fell, the lights of the clinic flickered on a beacon against the dark, glowing like a promise kept. They stood there hand in hand, watching people pass through the doors, strangers carrying their own stories of loss and redemption. And in that moment, the city didn't feel so heavy anymore. It felt alive. Alive with everything they'd fought for, every tear, every forgiveness, every quiet choice to stay. Love, Damian realized, wasn't what saved him. It was what made life worth saving. And as Janie whispered, "Ready to go home?" he smiled, finally understanding what home truly meant. It wasn't a place. It was her. And so this is where our story comes to rest, not with an ending, but with a quiet beginning. A tale that started in pain found its way to healing and love, that once trembled now stands steady in the light. Damian and Janie's journey reminds us that even the most fragile hearts can learn to trust again, and that forgiveness, whether for others or for ourselves, is the truest form of strength. If you've stayed with them until this moment, through every storm and sunrise, thank you. Thank you for believing in love that doesn't come easy, for listening with empathy, for carrying hope in a world that often forgets how to be gentle. May this story leave you with a small reminder that no matter how broken things may seem, there is always a place where light can return. And when it does, it often looks a lot like love. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for believing. Until the next story, keep your heart open.